If I had stayed 5 more seconds in the kitchen, none of this would have happened. The rain slammed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Blackthorn Hotel, hard enough to make the crystal chandeliers tremble above the ballroom, each flash of lightning turning Manhattan silver for half a second before drowning it in darkness again. I balanced a tray of champagne flutes against my shoulder and tried not to stare at the people around me. Women wrapped in diamonds brighter than police sirens. Men wearing watches that probably cost more than my student loans. At 24 years old, I had mastered the art of becoming invisible in rooms like this. Smile politely, keep moving, never speak unless spoken to. That was how girls like me survived places built for people like them. Table 9 needs refills, my manager snapped as he brushed past me. And try not to look terrified, Elena. Too late for that. The ballroom smelled like expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and money old enough to become cruel. Somewhere near the stage, a jazz band played soft enough to sound like a secret. Outside, thunder rolled over the city while guests laughed into glasses of whiskey older than I was. I should have been thinking about my overdue rent, about the anatomy exam waiting for me at 8 in the morning, about how many more catering shifts I needed before I could afford next semester's tuition. Instead, my attention drifted toward the terrace doors at the far end of the ballroom where 2 men stood arguing in low voices. They didn't belong to the glittering world around them. I could tell instantly. One wore a charcoal suit with broad shoulders and cold eyes that never stopped scanning the room. The other looked nervous enough to sweat through his collar despite the air conditioning. "The shipment moves tonight," the nervous man whispered. "He won't," the other interrupted sharply. "By midnight, Sebastian Romano won't be a problem anymore." My stomach dropped so suddenly I nearly lost grip on the tray. Romano, even I knew that name. Everybody in New York knew it, though nobody ever said it too loudly. Sebastian Romano owned hotels, shipping companies, half the city's nightlife. The newspapers called him a billionaire entrepreneur. The internet called him something else entirely. Dangerous, untouchable. The kind of man who made politicians nervous and security guards straighter when he walked into a room. I should have walked away. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to move, to forget whatever conversation I had accidentally overheard, to disappear back into the crowd before someone noticed me standing there frozen like an idiot. But fear has a strange way of slowing time. 1 second stretched too long, then another, and that was all it took. The nervous man turned his head slightly. His eyes locked onto mine through the reflection in the glass terrace door. My blood turned to ice. "Someone's listening," he hissed. The tray slipped in my hands. Crystal glasses rattled violently together, the sharp sound cutting through the music like breaking bones. Heads turned across the ballroom. My heartbeat exploded inside my chest. I didn't think. I ran. Past marble columns, past startled guests, past a waiter cursing as I nearly crashed into him. My flats slipped against polished floors while panic clawed up my throat so hard I could barely breathe. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Fast, heavy, getting closer. "Stop her!" someone shouted. I turned blindly toward the VIP section near the back of the ballroom where dark velvet curtains shielded private tables from the crowd. My lungs burned. I needed somewhere to hide. Anywhere. Then I saw the empty table tucked into the farthest corner beneath the shadow of a massive black floral arrangement. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees and crawled underneath it just as voices stormed past outside the curtains. My breathing sounded deafening in the darkness. I pressed one trembling hand over my mouth and curled tighter beneath the white tablecloth, trying to disappear into the shadows while expensive leather shoes crossed inches from my face. She was right here. Find her. "Mr. Romano is arriving any minute, Romano." The name hit me again like cold water. Slowly, carefully, I looked upward through the edge of the hanging tablecloth and saw a pair of polished black shoes stop directly in front of me, not passing by, stopping. My heart nearly gave out completely as someone with slow, deliberate calm. Then a man sat down. Silence followed, heavy, controlled, terrifying. I stared at the sharp shine of Italian leather shoes and the expensive black fabric stretched over powerful legs while thunder shook the windows again outside. Whoever sat above me hadn't called security, hadn't spoken, hadn't moved. But somehow, deep in my bones, I knew the horrifying truth before I ever looked up. Sebastian Romano had found me. The first thing I noticed about Sebastian Romano was how still he was. Not relaxed, not casual, still in the way a storm looks still right before it tears the sky apart. I stayed frozen beneath the table, my knees pressed painfully against marble flooring while rain battered the windows behind him. The ballroom noise returned slowly around us. Laughter, glasses clinking, silverware against china. Somewhere across the room, the jazz band kept playing like the world had not just tilted sideways beneath my feet. Sebastian did not move for several seconds. Then one of his hands rested lightly against the edge of the table above me, calm, controlled. A hand that looked expensive somehow. Clean fingers, a dark watch glinting beneath the cuff of his black suit jacket. "Sir," a man's voice stopped beside the table. We lost sight of her. Sebastian finally spoke, and his voice was quieter than I expected. Deep, smooth. Dangerous in a way that did not require volume. "Did she hear anything important?" "We are not sure." A pause. She looked terrified. Another silence stretched between them. I could hear my own heartbeat so loudly I was certain they could hear it too. Then Sebastian said something that made the air leave my lungs completely. Terrified people lowered his voice. "Should we lock down the exits?" "No." Sebastian reached for a whiskey glass above me. Ice shifted softly inside crystal. "That would attract attention." His tone stayed perfectly calm, but there was something underneath it, something sharp enough to make my stomach tighten. "Find the men from the terrace instead." Footsteps disappeared into the crowd. I squeezed my eyes shut. This could not be happening. I was supposed to finish my shift by midnight, take the subway home to Queens, and spend 3 hours pretending I understood cardiovascular anatomy before my exam in the morning. Instead, I was hiding beneath the table of the most feared man in New York while people hunted for me 10 feet away. My breathing started shaking again before I could stop it. Sebastian's hand paused against the whiskey glass. "If you keep breathing like that," he said softly. I nearly stopped breathing altogether. Slowly, carefully, I tilted my head upward. The edge of the tablecloth hid most of his face, but I caught part of his jawline beneath the ballroom lights. Sharp, controlled, clean-shaven. The kind of face magazines would call handsome while warning women to stay away from men like him. His attention remained fixed ahead as if he were not speaking directly to me. "I am sorry," I whispered before I could stop myself. The words sounded pathetic the second they left my mouth. Sebastian leaned back slightly in his chair. Around us, wealthy guests drifted through the ballroom in glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos, completely unaware that I was curled beneath one of the VIP tables like a frightened child. "You should be," he replied calmly. Heat rushed into my face. I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. "I did not mean to hear anything," I whispered. "I was just working." Sebastian said nothing for a moment. Then another chair pulled out beside him. A second man sat down. "The council members are waiting," the newcomer said. "And Petrov keeps asking questions." Sebastian finally shifted slightly, crossing one leg over the other above me. "Let him ask. You think he knows? Everybody knows something." His voice remained smooth and unreadable. "The dangerous ones are the people who know too much." My chest tightened painfully. He knew I was there, knew I could hear every word, and somehow that felt intentional now. Like he wanted me to understand exactly how trapped I was. More men joined the table over the next few minutes. Expensive shoes circled around me. Low voices discussed shipments, contracts, investments, politicians. None of it sounded illegal directly. That was what frightened me most. Everything sounded polished, controlled, professional. Like violence had learned how to wear a tailored suit. I stayed perfectly still beneath the white linen tablecloth while Sebastian Romano ruled the room above me without ever raising his voice once. Then suddenly the conversation stopped. Silence rolled across the table so fast it made my skin prickle. Sebastian lowered his glass carefully onto the table. "Someone is staring at this table," he said. Chairs shifted instantly. I heard movement around us. My pulse exploded again. "Relax," Sebastian said calmly a second later. "It is only the mayor." A few quiet laughs followed, but nobody sounded truly relaxed except him. That was the terrifying part. Sebastian Romano did not sound afraid of anything. Not the politicians shaking his hand, not the men plotting against him. Not even the terrified girl hiding beneath his table after overhearing something she never should have heard. Then, without warning, his fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the tablecloth near my shoulder. Not enough to touch me. Just enough to remind me he knew exactly where I was. "Stay quiet," he murmured softly, "and do not leave yet." Time stopped making sense beneath Sebastian Romano's table. Minutes stretched too long beneath layers of velvet tablecloth and low, dangerous voices, while the ballroom glittered around us like nothing was wrong. I stayed curled against the marble floor, my legs beginning to ache from remaining perfectly still, but I did not dare move. Not after the way his fingers brushed near my shoulder, not after the quiet warning in his voice. "Do not leave yet." Nobody had ever said something so calmly and made it sound so absolute. Another burst of thunder rolled outside the hotel windows, rattling the glass hard enough to make several guests glance toward the storm. Manhattan looked blurred beyond the rain. White headlights smeared across wet streets 50 floors below us. Somewhere in the city, normal people were probably ordering takeout, watching television, complaining about the weather. Meanwhile, I was hiding beneath the table of a man powerful enough to silence an entire room without lifting his voice. Sebastian. A new voice approached the table. Older. Smooth, the senator is asking if you will still attend the fundraiser in Boston next week. No, Sebastian answered immediately. Reschedule it. That will upset people. People survive disappointment every day. A few restrained laughs followed. Even seated beneath the table around him adjusted themselves carefully whenever he spoke. Like gravity shifted toward him automatically, one of the men lowered his voice. There is another issue. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that made my stomach knot before anyone even spoke again. Petrov's men are still searching the lower floors, the man continued carefully. They think the girl heard everything. My throat tightened so suddenly it hurt. Sebastian remained quiet for several seconds. Then ice clinked softly in his whiskey glass again. And, if they find her first, they may create unnecessary attention. Then they should not find her first. Calm, flat, controlled. But underneath his words sat something cold enough to freeze the air around us. The man him hesitated. Should we intervene? No. Sebastian leaned back slowly above me. I dislike panic. It makes people sloppy. My pulse hammered painfully inside my chest. They were talking about me like I was already part of some game I did not understand, a problem to manage, a loose thread to tie off before it damaged something bigger. I pressed my hand harder against my mouth to steady my breathing. Then suddenly Sebastian spoke again, quieter this time, almost thoughtful. How old do you think she is? My eyes widened beneath the tablecloth. Nobody answered immediately. 22? Someone guessed, maybe younger. Young enough to look terrified every time the elevator doors opened tonight, Sebastian murmured. Heat rushed into my face. He had noticed me before this. Somehow that frightened me more than anything else. I remembered carrying drinks through the ballroom earlier and feeling eyes on me near the staircase, cold, observant. I had assumed it was anxiety. Now I realized Sebastian Romano had probably been watching the entire room long before I ever heard his name whispered on the terrace. What should we do if Petrov keeps pushing? Another man asked carefully. Sebastian's answer came instantly. Remind him whose hotel he is standing in. The room fell quiet again after that. Nobody argued with him. Nobody questioned him. It was not fear exactly. It was certainty. Like everyone already understood the rules around him. I shifted slightly beneath the table, trying to ease the sharp pain in my cramped ankle. The movement made the edge of the tablecloth stir. One polished black shoe turned slightly toward me immediately. My entire body froze. Sebastian noticed everything. Sir? One of the men asked. Nothing. Sebastian's voice stayed smooth. Continue. My heartbeat became unbearable. I stared at the marble floor while expensive shoes moved around me like pieces on a chessboard. Somewhere nearby, a server laughed nervously at something a guest said. Plates clinked. Music drifted softly through the ballroom. The normal sounds made everything feel even stranger somehow, like two completely different worlds existed inside the same room. Then a woman's voice floated near the table. Mr. Romano, sweet, polished, flirtatious. The photographers are asking if you would join the mayor for pictures. Sebastian exhaled quietly through his nose. Tell them no. They specifically requested you. Then they can survive disappointment too. A few men chuckled again. The woman lingered beside him a second longer. You have become impossible lately, Sebastian. That implies I was pleasant before. More laughter. The woman finally walked away in expensive heels clicking against marble. I swallowed hard beneath the tablecloth. Somehow hearing him joke casually with powerful people made him more intimidating, not less, because nothing about him felt forced. He did not try to dominate rooms. Rooms simply adjusted around him naturally. Then his hand lowered slowly toward the edge of the table beside me again. This time his fingers rested against the white linen only inches from my arm. Warm, steady, controlled. You are shaking, he said quietly enough that only I could hear. I stared upward through the shadows beneath the table. I am scared, I whispered back before I could stop myself. A pause followed. Then Sebastian Romano said the one thing that made my blood run cold all over again. Good, he murmured softly. That means you understand the situation. The meeting ended slowly, like a storm refusing to leave the coastline. One by one, the men around Sebastian Romano stood from the table and disappeared back into the glittering ballroom beyond the velvet curtains. Their polished shoes crossed my line of vision before fading into distant music and conversation. I stayed completely still beneath the tablecloth, afraid even to breathe too loudly. Sebastian remained seated above me long after everyone else had gone quiet. Ice shifted softly inside his glass again. Rain hammered against the hotel windows harder now, turning the city outside into streaks of silver and black. Somewhere near the dance floor, guests applauded politely at something I could not see. The normal sound made everything feel unreal, like I had slipped into the wrong version of my life by accident. "How long are you planning to stay under there?" Sebastian asked finally. My throat tightened instantly. I stared at the marble floor for another second before whispering until everyone leaves. A low sound escaped him, not quite laughter. "That may take hours." I swallowed hard, my knees hurt, my back ached. But none of that mattered compared to the men searching the hotel for me. "I cannot leave," I admitted quietly. "They will find me." Sebastian was silent for a moment, then his chair shifted slightly above me. "Yes," he said calmly, "they probably will." Fear curled tighter around my ribs. I pressed my forehead briefly against my trembling hands, trying to think clearly. I needed to leave the hotel, needed to disappear before sunrise, needed to pretend this entire night never happened. But deep down, I already understood something terrible. Men like the ones on the terrace did not simply forget faces, especially terrified girls who overheard conversations they should not have heard. Sebastian stood suddenly. The movement startled me hard enough that I nearly hit my head against the underside of the table. I watched his polished shoes step closer to the edge of the tablecloth before stopping directly in front of me again. "Come out!" My pulse exploded. "What?" "You cannot stay there forever." His voice remained perfectly calm, and people are beginning to notice that I have been sitting alone for 20 minutes. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me not to move. But remaining beneath his table suddenly felt childish. Worse than childish. Vulnerable. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the tablecloth aside and crawled out onto the marble floor. The ballroom lights nearly blinded me. After so long in the shadows, I rose unsteadily to my feet, smoothing trembling hands down the front of my black server uniform while avoiding Sebastian's eyes completely. Then I finally looked up and immediately understood why people feared him. Sebastian Romano was taller than I expected. Maybe 6'3", broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black suit. Dark hair brushed neatly away from a face too sharp to be called merely handsome, but his eyes were the worst part. Grey, cold, observant in a way that made me feel transparent standing in front of him. Like he could see every frightened thought moving through my head. He studied me quietly for several long seconds, not rudely, not flirtatiously, carefully, the way someone might study damage after a car accident. "You are younger than I thought," he said finally. Heat rushed into my face again. "I am 24. His gaze dropped briefly toward the tray burns faintly visible along my wrist from years of restaurant work, then toward the cheap black flats hurting my feet after 9 straight hours on shift. Nothing about me belonged in this room. "You work for the catering company," he said. Not a question. I nodded once. "Part-time. And school?" I blinked in surprise. "How did you know I am in school?" One corner of his mouth moved slightly. "You carry stress like a student." The answer should not have made my stomach tighten the way it did. Before I could respond, movement appeared near the ballroom entrance. 2 men in dark suits stepped through the crowd, scanning faces carefully, searching. My blood went cold instantly. Sebastian noticed my expression change before I even turned fully toward them. "Easy," he murmured. One of the men pointed slightly in our direction. Panic hit me so hard my vision blurred around the edges. Without thinking, I grabbed Sebastian's sleeve. "Please," I whispered, "please do not let them take me." The words escaped before pride could stop them. Sebastian's eyes dropped slowly toward my hand, gripping his jacket. The ballroom noise seemed to fade around us again. Thunder rolled outside the windows. My heartbeat became unbearable beneath his steady gaze. Then Sebastian did something unexpected. He lifted one hand calmly toward my waist and guided me closer against his side just as the men approached the VIP section. The movement looked effortless, natural, possessive enough to send confusion rushing through me. "Mr. Romano," one of the men said carefully. "We are looking for someone." Sebastian never looked away from me. "Clearly," he replied smoothly. "You are disturbing my evening anyway." The men hesitated. Their eyes flicked briefly toward me before immediately dropping again. Nobody looked at Sebastian Romano for too long. We were told a waitress may have overheard sensitive information. Sebastian's hand remained steady against my waist, warm, controlled. "Then perhaps your people should learn to whisper." Silence followed. Dangerous silence. Then Sebastian finally looked at the men for the first time all night. His expression barely changed, somehow that made him even more intimidating. "You are standing in my section," he said quietly. "Leave." And they did. The two men disappeared into the crowd without another word, but my body stayed tense beside Sebastian Romano, like danger had rooted itself beneath my skin permanently. His hand remained lightly against my waist for another second before slowly releasing me. The absence of his touch felt strange immediately. I hated that I noticed. Around us, the ballroom returned to normal again with terrifying speed. Politicians laughed beside champagne towers. Wealthy couples drifted across the dance floor beneath golden chandeliers. Servers carried silver trays through the crowd while lightning flashed against the massive hotel windows overlooking Manhattan. Nobody looked alarmed, nobody looked afraid. Either they did not know who Sebastian really was, or they knew exactly who he was and had learned long ago not to react. I wrapped my arms tightly around myself. "Thank you," I whispered quietly. Sebastian studied me with those cold grey eyes for several seconds before answering. "You should save your gratitude until the evening ends." The words settled heavily in my stomach. Before I could ask what he meant, another man approached us quickly from across the ballroom, taller than the others, dark suit, short beard. He stopped beside Sebastian with the ease of someone used to standing near power without fearing it. "We have a problem," he said quietly. Sebastian barely reacted. "Define problem." "Petrov's people found one of the servers downstairs." My blood turned cold again instantly. "And?" Sebastian asked calmly. "Wrong girl." The man's eyes flicked briefly toward me before returning to Sebastian. "But now they know she works for the catering company." Panic rose so hard inside my chest I nearly stopped breathing. There were probably 50 servers in the hotel tonight. Eventually someone would point them toward me. My manager knew my full name. My address sat in company records. I suddenly imagined strange cars outside my apartment building in Queens. Men waiting near the subway platform tomorrow morning. My pulse became uneven enough that Sebastian noticed immediately. "Breathe," he said quietly. I tried, failed. "I need to leave," I whispered. "Right now." Sebastian's expression did not change. No, the single word hit harder than shouting would have. I stared at him in disbelief. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean," he said calmly, "walking out of this hotel alone would be a very poor decision." Fear sharpened my voice before I could stop it. "I cannot stay here." "Correct. Then what am I supposed to do?" For the first time all evening, something shifted faintly in his expression. Not softness exactly, more like patience being tested. "You are supposed to stop panicking long enough to listen." His voice stayed low and controlled, but something about it made me immediately go silent. The bearded man beside him glanced toward the ballroom entrance again. "We should move," he murmured. Sebastian nodded once. Then he looked coming with me. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. "No," his gaze hardened slightly. "That was not a request." Lightning flashed outside again, illuminating half the ballroom in silver. I took one small step backward instinctively. Sebastian noticed too, of course he did. He noticed everything. "Listen carefully, Elena." Hearing my name in his voice sent another chill through me. I had never told him my name, which meant he already knew. "There are currently men searching this hotel for you," he continued calmly. "Some of them are impatient, some of them are frightened. Frightened men tend to make reckless decisions." My throat tightened painfully. "I do not understand why you are helping me." Sebastian went quiet for a moment. The jazz music drifted softly through the ballroom around us, while guests continued dancing beneath the chandeliers. Finally he answered with brutal honesty. "Because you are safer near me than anywhere else tonight." The terrifying part was that I believed him immediately. Sebastian turned toward the bearded man. "Have the car brought upstairs." "Already done." "Good." He looked back at me again. "You have two choices, Elena. You can leave this hotel alone and hope nobody recognizes you before sunrise." His eyes lowered briefly toward the trembling hands I could not steady no matter how hard I tried. "Or you can trust me for one night." Trust him. The idea sounded insane. This man terrified half the city without raising his voice. Men obeyed him instantly. Politicians approached him carefully. Dangerous people searched entire hotel floors because of conversations involving his name. Every instinct I possessed should have told me to run from him. Instead, standing beneath the ballroom lights while thunder shook the windows behind us, I realized something far more frightening. Sebastian Romano was the only person in this building who had not lied to me once all night. "One night," I whispered carefully. Sebastian held my gaze steadily. "One night," he repeated. Then his expression darkened slightly as movement appeared near the ballroom entrance again. Two unfamiliar men stepped inside, scanning faces carefully through the crowd. searching, hunting. Sebastian noticed them immediately, so did I. Fear crawled violently down my spine. Without another word, Sebastian removed his black suit jacket and draped it around my shoulders. The fabric smelled faintly like cedarwood, rain, and expensive cologne, warm from his body heat, possessive enough to make my pulse stumble. Then he leaned closer, just enough for only me to hear him. "Stay beside me," he murmured softly, "and whatever happens next, do not let go of my arm." The moment my fingers closed around Sebastian Romano's arm, the entire ballroom seemed to shift around us. Conversations softened as people noticed him moving toward the exit. Wealthy guests stepped aside instinctively without being asked. A path opened through the crowd like the room itself understood who he was. I stayed close beside him beneath the weight of his black suit jacket, trying to keep my breathing steady while my heart hammered against my ribs hard enough to hurt. The fabric smelled faintly like rain and cedarwood, warm, expensive, dangerous. Sebastian walked calmly through the ballroom as if nothing unusual had happened tonight. Like frightened men were not searching the hotel for me, like my entire life had not just collapsed sideways beneath crystal chandeliers and thunder. "Do not look nervous," he murmured quietly without glancing down at me. "I am nervous," I whispered back immediately. One corner of his mouth moved slightly. "Yes, I noticed." Heat rushed into my face despite everything. We passed politicians, businessmen, women wrapped in diamonds bright enough to hurt my eyes. Everyone greeted Sebastian carefully, respectfully. Some smiled too quickly. Others avoided direct eye contact altogether. Nobody ignored him. Near the ballroom doors, an older man in a navy tuxedo stepped with a practiced political smile. "Sebastian," he said warmly. "Leaving already?" Sebastian slowed without releasing my arm. "Unfortunately." The older man's eyes flicked toward me curiously. "And who is this?" My stomach tightened instantly. Sebastian did not hesitate even half a second. "A guest under my protection." The words hit harder than they should have. The older man nodded immediately after that. No more questions, no confusion, just instant understanding. That frightened me more than if Sebastian had threatened someone openly. His authority felt absolute in ways I still could not fully process. We continued moving through the hotel while security guards discreetly opened doors ahead of us before Sebastian even reached them. The deeper we moved into the private side of the building, the quieter everything became. The ballroom music faded behind us until only the storm remained. Rain battered the tall windows lining the hallway. Lightning flashed silver across polished marble floors. My cheap black flats clicked nervously beside Sebastian's calm, measured footsteps. "Where are we going?" I asked softly. "Upstairs." "Upstairs where?" "My penthouse." Sebastian noticed instantly. His grey eyes lowered toward me calmly. "You promised one night," he reminded me. I did not exactly have much choice. "No," he agreed smoothly. "You did not." The honesty in his voice unsettled me again. Most powerful men probably would have lied, pretended this was about protection alone. Sebastian Romano simply stated facts and expected the world to adjust around them. We reached a private elevator guarded by two men in dark suits. Both stepped aside immediately when they saw Sebastian approaching. One pressed a button without speaking. The elevator doors slid open soundlessly. Gold lighting reflected off marble walls inside the elevator car. Everything about this hotel screamed wealth so extreme it stopped feeling real. Sebastian guided me inside first before stepping in beside me. The doors closed quietly behind us. Silence settled instantly. For the first time all evening there were no crowds around us. No politicians, no security teams, no ballroom noise. Just me and Sebastian standing alone beneath soft golden light, while rain streaked across the glass wall overlooking Manhattan. My pulse became painfully loud again. I stared at the glowing city beneath us instead of looking directly at him. "You really own this hotel?" I asked quietly. "Among other things, It was not intended to be." I glanced sideways at him finally. Sebastian stood with one hand loosely in his pocket, tie slightly loosened now beneath the sharp lines of his black suit. Up close, he looked tired in ways the ballroom lighting had hidden earlier. Not physically exhausted, something deeper than that. Like carrying too much responsibility for too many years. Then lightning flashed across the glass again, illuminating the faint scar near the edge of his jaw I had not noticed before. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Men like Sebastian probably did not survive gentle lives. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked suddenly. I blinked. "Like what?" "Like you are trying to solve something." Heat rushed into my face immediately. "I am not." Sebastian studied me for another second before looking back toward the city below us. "You are very bad at lying, Elena." The elevator continued rising smoothly. My reflection trembled faintly in the dark glass beside his taller, steadier silhouette. I looked small standing next to him, young, completely out of place in this world of private elevators and armed security. "Are you always this calm?" I asked before I could stop myself. Sebastian's expression barely shifted. No. The answer surprised me enough that I finally looked directly at him again. "Then why are you calm now?" A long silence followed. Thunder rolled somewhere far below the building. Then Sebastian lowered his gaze toward me slowly enough to make my heartbeat stumble all over again. "Because if I start reacting emotionally tonight," he said quietly, "people are going to get hurt." The elevator doors opened before I could respond. Soft golden light spilled across polished dark floors beyond the hallway entrance to his penthouse. Somewhere inside, music played quietly through hidden speakers. Expensive, elegant, cold. Sebastian stepped out first, then paused beside the open elevator doors and looked back at me. "Welcome to the safest place in New York tonight," he said calmly. Then his eyes darkened slightly, "which should probably concern you more than it does." The penthouse did not look like any home I had ever seen before. It looked like something built for a man who trusted nobody and controlled everything. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire living space, revealing Manhattan beneath the storm like a kingdom made of silver lights and rain. Black marble floors reflected soft golden lighting hidden inside the walls. Expensive modern furniture sat perfectly arranged across the massive room without a single personal item out of place. No family photos, no clutter, no signs that anyone actually lived here beyond the faint scent of cedarwood lingering in the air. I stepped slowly inside while Sebastian Romano removed his tie with one calm movement near the doorway behind me. "You can stop looking for hidden exits," he said casually. I froze immediately. "I was not." "You were." He draped the loosened tie across the back of a chair before looking at me again. "There are 3 elevators, 2 stairwells, and a private security entrance downstairs." My stomach tightened. "Why would you tell me that?" "Because if you were planning to run, you would have done it already." I hated how certain he sounded. Worse, I hated that he was probably right. Sebastian crossed the room toward a dark marble bar near the windows, while I remained standing awkwardly near the entrance wrapped in his oversized suit jacket. Rain streaked down the glass behind him while lightning illuminated the skyline beyond. Everything about him looked controlled even now, every movement precise, intentional. "Water?" he asked. "Please." He handed me a crystal glass a moment later. Our fingers brushed briefly as I took it from him, and the simple contact startled me more than it should have. Sebastian noticed. Of course he did. His grey eyes lowered toward my trembling hand around the glass. "You are still shaking. Tonight has been stressful." One corner of his mouth moved slightly again. Another accurate observation. I took a long drink of water, mostly to avoid looking directly at him. The penthouse suddenly felt too quiet after the chaos downstairs. Too private. I became painfully aware that I was alone with a man powerful enough to make armed men walk away with a single sentence. Sebastian loosened the top button of his white dress shirt before stepping toward the windows overlooking the city. "You can sit down, Elena. Nobody is interrogating you. Yet." The word escaped before I could stop it. Sebastian glanced over his shoulder at me. "If I intended to interrogate you, this conversation would feel very different." That answer did not comfort me nearly as much as he probably intended. Slowly, cautiously, I sat on the edge of the enormous cream-colored sofa near the windows while trying not to look as out of place as I felt. My cheap black flats rested awkwardly against marble floors worth more than my entire apartment building. Sebastian remained standing nearby, watching the rain over Manhattan in silence for several seconds. Then he spoke without turning around. "Tell me exactly what you heard on the terrace." My grip tightened around the water glass instantly. There it was, the real reason I was here. I swallowed carefully. "Not much." Sebastian finally looked at me again, calm, patient. "Eleanor." Something about the way he said my name made lying feel impossible. "I heard them mention a shipment," I admitted quietly. "And your name." His expression did not change. "Anything else?" I hesitated. "One of them said you would not be a problem by midnight." Silence settled heavily across the penthouse. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while thunder rolled somewhere above the city. Sebastian absorbed my words without visible reaction. Somehow that frightened me more than anger would have. "Do you know who they were?" I asked carefully. "Yes." "Are they dangerous?" Sebastian held my gaze steadily for a second too long. "Everybody is dangerous when they become desperate enough." My chest tightened again. "And now they think I heard too much." "You did." I looked away toward the storm outside the windows. I should have stayed in the kitchen, probably. The brutal honesty in his voice almost made me laugh despite the fear twisting inside me. I rubbed tired fingers against my forehead. Exhaustion finally started crashing down over me all at once. My feet hurt, my head hurt. I had not eaten since noon. Somewhere out there my phone was probably exploding with missed calls from my manager, wondering why I vanished halfway through the shift. My entire normal life suddenly felt very far away. Sebastian noticed the shift in my expression immediately. "When did you last eat?" I blinked in surprise. "What food, Elena? You look exhausted." "I am fine." His gaze sharpened slightly. That was not an answer. I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped because honestly I could not remember the last real meal I had eaten. Coffee and half a granola bar in the subway station probably did not count. Sebastian exhaled quietly through his nose before walking toward the kitchen area without another word. I stared after him in confusion. This man discussed threats and politicians like weather forecasts, yet somehow noticed whether I had eaten dinner. Nothing about him made sense. A few minutes later he returned carrying a plate with fruit, bread and pasta that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. He set it down carefully on the glass table in front of me. "Eat." I stared up at him cautiously. "You are ordering me around again." "Yes, you do that a lot." Sebastian's expression remained perfectly calm. People usually listen. The terrifying part was that I already had. Watching Sebastian Romano move through his own penthouse was like watching someone exist inside a world built entirely around control. Nothing in the room felt accidental. The lighting softened automatically as midnight deepened outside the windows. Quiet instrumental music drifted through hidden speakers somewhere above us. Rain continued sliding down the glass walls overlooking Manhattan while thunder rolled farther away now, softer than before. The storm was moving downtown. I sat curled carefully against the edge of the cream-colored sofa, with his black jacket still wrapped around my shoulders, while Sebastian leaned one hand against the marble kitchen counter, watching me eat like he did not fully trust me to take care of myself. Which was ridiculous. I was 24 years old. I worked 2 jobs. I survived New York City on caffeine and stubbornness, and yet somehow this terrifying man had looked at me once and immediately decided I needed supervision. "You are staring again," I muttered quietly before taking another bite of pasta. Sebastian's expression barely shifted. "You eat like someone who forgets meals regularly." Heat rushed into my face immediately. "That is not true." He looked pointedly toward the half-empty plate, already disappearing faster than I realized. Another poor lie. I exhaled sharply through my nose. "You always have an answer for everything, do not you, usually?" Somehow the calm confidence in his voice should have irritated me more than it did. Instead, exhaustion softened the sharp edges of my fear little by little, not completely. I was still painfully aware of who Sebastian Romano was. Still aware that dangerous men were searching the city for me because of conversations involving him. But inside this penthouse, surrounded by rain and quiet music and warm lighting, the terror felt farther away than it had downstairs. Which honestly scared me too. Because safe people should not feel dangerous, and dangerous people definitely should not feel safe. Sebastian moved away from the kitchen counter a moment later, loosening the cuffs of his white dress shirt as he crossed toward the windows. The movement exposed strong forearms marked faintly by old scars beneath expensive watch bands and tailored fabric. My eyes caught on them before I could stop myself. Sebastian noticed immediately. "You look concerned." I glanced away too quickly. "I was not looking." "Elena," my face burned. "Fine, I was looking." Sebastian studied me for another second before glancing down briefly at his own wrist. "Occupational hazards." The casual answer unsettled me more than details would have. I stared down at the plate resting in my lap instead. "Do you ever get tired?" I asked quietly. "Of what?" "People being afraid of you." Silence stretched between us for a few seconds while rain tapped softly against the windows. Then Sebastian answered honestly enough to catch me off guard again. "Fear is useful. That is not what I asked." His grey eyes lowered toward me slowly. "No," he agreed, "it was not." Something complicated shifted across his expression then. Brief enough that I almost missed it completely. Tiredness maybe. Loneliness. It disappeared too fast to name properly. Sebastian walked toward a nearby cabinet and removed a small black medical kit from one of the drawers. "What happened to your ankle?" I blinked in surprise. "What? You have been limping since the ballroom." I stared at him speechlessly for a second. I had barely noticed the pain myself beneath everything else tonight. "It is nothing." Sebastian set the medical kit down calmly on the glass table in front of me. "You are also very bad at pretending not to hurt." I looked down reluctantly. My right ankle had swollen slightly above the strap of my cheap black flat from twisting it while running through the ballroom earlier. Nothing serious, just painful. "It will be fine tomorrow," I insisted quietly. Sebastian crouched beside the table without responding. The movement startled me enough that I nearly dropped my fork. Powerful men like him did not kneel beside people, especially not frightened catering servers from Queens. Yet there he was beneath the soft golden lighting, calmly reaching toward my injured ankle like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Sebastian, relax." His voice stayed low and steady. "I am checking whether you damaged anything seriously." My pulse stumbled awkwardly against my ribs as his careful fingers brushed lightly against my ankle. Warm, control gentle in a way I never expected from him. I watched him closely while he examined the swelling with focused attention. His touch never crossed any line, never lingered too long. Somehow that made it harder to breathe. "Does this hurt?" he asked quietly, pressing lightly near the side of my ankle. I flinched immediately. Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly. "You should have said something earlier. Tonight seemed busy." A faint breath of amusement escaped him then, not laughter exactly, just enough to soften the sharpness around his eyes for half a second. That may be the first intelligent understatement I have heard all year. He reached for a clean bandage from the medical kit before carefully wrapping my ankle with practiced precision. I stared down at the top of his dark head in disbelief while rain shimmered across the windows behind him. "You know how to do this?" I asked softly. "I know how to survive." The answer settled heavily somewhere deep inside my chest. Sebastian secured the bandage gently before finally looking back up at me. For one strange suspended moment, neither of us moved. The city glowed silver beneath the storm outside. His hand still rested lightly against my ankle. My heartbeat became painfully uneven beneath his steady gaze. Then Sebastian spoke quietly enough to almost sound human instead of untouchable. "You should stop looking at me like I am a monster, Elena." My throat tightened unexpectedly. Because the terrifying truth was that I was starting to forget to. The room went painfully quiet after Sebastian Romano said those words. Rain drifted softly against the windows behind him while the city shimmered beneath midnight clouds, but inside the penthouse, silence wrapped around us so tightly I could hear my own heartbeat. Sebastian still knelt beside the sofa, one hand resting lightly near my bandaged ankle, while those cold grey eyes held mine with unsettling steadiness. I should have looked away first. Instead, I heard myself ask the worst possible question. "Then what are you?" Something changed in his expression immediately. Not anger, something sharper, more dangerous. Sebastian slowly leaned back onto his heels before standing to his full height again. The distance between us returned instantly, and somehow I missed his warmth beside me the second it disappeared. That realization alone terrified me. He crossed toward the windows overlooking Manhattan without answering right away. Lightning flashed faintly through the clouds, illuminating the sharp lines of his profile in silver and shadow. "That depends who you ask," he said quietly after a long silence. I pulled his oversized suit jacket tighter around my shoulders against the sudden chill inside the room. What would they say downstairs? Sebastian slipped both hands into the pockets of his dress pants while staring out over the city below. "Politicians would call me useful." His voice stayed calm. "Controlled businessmen would call me necessary. And your enemies?" One corner of his mouth moved faintly without humor. "Creative." I should have stopped asking questions. Any intelligent person would have stopped hours ago, but exhaustion and fear had worn away my common sense little by little until only curiosity remained. "And what would you call yourself?" Sebastian finally looked back at me then. Really looked at me. His expression gave nothing away, but something heavy moved behind his eyes too fast to fully understand. "Tired," he admitted quietly. The answer hit harder than anything else he had said all night. Not powerful, not dangerous, not feared. Tired. I stared at him for a second too long. "You do look exhausted," I said softly before I could stop myself. Sebastian blinked once like he genuinely did not expect honesty from me. Most people are smarter than that. Than what? Than pointing out weakness. I frowned slightly. Being tired is not weakness. In my world it is. The way he said my world settled heavily between us. Like an invisible line neither of us could cross completely. I looked down at the city lights beyond the windows. "I do not think I understand your world at all." "Good." His answer came immediately. "You should keep it that way." Another silence followed while rain shimmered across the glass walls surrounding the penthouse. Somewhere in the distance, sirens echoed faintly through Manhattan's streets far below us. Normal city sounds, ordinary life continuing while mine unraveled hour by hour. Can I ask you something? I said carefully. Sebastian nodded once. Why did you protect me downstairs? He held my gaze steadily. No, I shook my head slightly. You said I was safer near you. That is not the same thing. Something unreadable flickered briefly across his face. You want a more honest answer? Yes. Sebastian exhaled quietly through his nose before turning away from the windows. Because the moment I realized men were searching for you, he said calmly, I knew they would not stop. My chest tightened. That does not explain why you care. His eyes lowered toward me slowly. It explains enough. Frustration slipped into my voice before I could hide it. You answer questions like a lawyer. No. Sebastian loosened another button near the collar of his white dress shirt. Lawyers are paid to confuse people. I simply dislike giving information away freely. I stared at him for another long moment before muttering quietly, You are impossible. To my complete shock, a soft laugh escaped him. Actual laughter this time, low, brief. Real enough to transform his entire face for half a second. Be blinked in surprise. You laugh? Sebastian raised one dark eyebrow slightly. Occasionally. That is unsettling. Most things about me seem unsettling to you. Can you blame me? His expression softened almost invisibly then. Another strange silence stretched between us. Less sharp now, less afraid. I hated how quickly the tension around him shifted when he allowed himself to feel human for even a second. It made him more dangerous somehow. Easier to trust, easier to forget. Sebastian's phone buzzed suddenly against the marble counter nearby. The entire atmosphere inside the penthouse changed instantly. The warmth vanished from his expression so fast it almost felt unreal. He glanced down at the screen once before answering. Speak. I watched him carefully while rain continued falling beyond the windows. Whatever the person said on the other end made Sebastian's jaw tighten slightly. Nobody leaves the building until morning. A pause. And Petrov? His grey eyes flicked briefly toward me sitting on the sofa wrapped in his jacket. He is becoming impatient. Sebastian, dangerous softness. Remind him patience is healthier than disappointing me. The call ended. Silence returned immediately afterward, but something darker settled into the room this time. I felt it instantly. What happened? I asked quietly. Sebastian slipped his phone back into his pocket before answering. The men looking for you are still downstairs. My stomach dropped. They are still here? Yes. Why? Sebastian held my gaze steadily for one unbearable second before answering with brutal honesty again. Because they believe you are important to me now.